Hello and welcome to episode 85 of the Synergen Leadership Podcast. For those of you who are listening for the first time, my name is Julian and I'm the CEO and the co-founder of Synergen Group. I'm passionate about all things leadership and management, so passionate in fact that I decided to start a podcast about it. And here we are in season 2, and my purpose for the podcast continues to be the same, to raise the standard of leadership. So in today's show, I speak with Tony Holmwood, who is the author of Best Behaviour, Empowering Managers and HR Leaders to Coach and Align Employee Behaviours to Supercharge Growth. Tony is the founder of Outperf4m Consulting, who offer a unique approach to improving your business profitability by partnering your HR and management team to align your business for change, gain clarity of business goals and benefits, whilst undertaking a performance reporting refresh to enable a proactive culture of improvement and growth. Tony is passionate about human behaviour and people development. He is a commercially focused chartered accountant with substantial business performance experience in large, local and global organisations. He's also a qualified motivational, behavioural and emotional practitioner, and he's gained a solid appreciation that people drive business, and in the absence of people, there is no profit. He's worked with organisations such as Bega, Fonterra, American Express and KPMG. Now, during the course of the conversation, we explore his book in detail. I start off, as always, asking Tony why did he decide to write this book. We speak about the new world of HR and management and how we can develop ourselves. We discuss the idea of forging deeper relationships and the significance of self-awareness. And I finish the interview by asking Tony about the power of goal setting and why we must, as individuals, appreciate the need for change. So keep listening, and as always, we'd really like to hear your thoughts about the interview with Tony Holmwood, author of Best Behaviour, Empowering Managers and HR Leaders to Coach and Align Employee Behaviours to Supercharge Growth. Happy listening.
Welcome to the Synergen Leadership Podcast with Julian Carl. Julian returns in 2019 with weekly conversations with leaders and authors from Australia and around the world, giving you the opportunity to share in their journey and learn from their expertise and knowledge. Julian also shares some of the tools and techniques he uses as a leader, mentor and facilitator, helping you to build your leadership capability and improve your confidence as a leader.
Well, welcome, Tony, to the Synergen Leadership Podcast. Really appreciate you taking the time to be a part of it so that the listeners have a bit of a sense of who you are. Who is Tony Holmwood?
I'm actually a cultural change and emotional intelligence coach, and I have actually a background as a chartered accountant. But of recent times, I've moved into projects and into change management, and only recently moved into more of a cultural change role and also leadership emotional intelligence. With my background and also having resolved some personal struggles around social phobia, that's brought in a lot of my learned behaviours and also skills, which I can hopefully take to leadership in the marketplace, especially around HR teams and managers.
Great. So we're here today to talk about your book called Best Behaviour, Empowering Managers and HR Leaders to Coach and Align Employee Behaviours to Supercharge Growth. Why did you decide to write a book about it?
Well, about 15 years ago, I left my role as the head of sales planning and compensation for a major software company after being disillusioned by its toxic culture. My experience back then with working with HR and systems helped me to see a bit of a gap in the market in terms of providing HR development and processes to small to medium business who typically wouldn't have a HR presence. So at the time, HR was obviously being disrupted. I know in 2004 alone in the US, about 3.8 million HR roles were displaced through HR outsourcing. So we're fighting a bit of an uphill battle to sell our services, and the business failed to get funding. And at that stage, people strategy had pretty much taken a back seat to achieving short-term profit objectives. So this was the reason I conceived the balanced behavioural development model, which presented a definitive role for HR ownership of relationships and emotional intelligence in organisations.
Okay, well, I want to start by reading a bit of an excerpt, which I think sort of touches on a couple of key points for me. As a human resources HR professional, are you struggling under the burden of regulatory compliance with only limited time, resources and support to influence your organisation's profitability? As a manager, are you finding it difficult to keep your employees motivated and engaged? Do you feel the need to help them realise a better quality of life without necessarily knowing where to start? Would you rather be developing employee potential to increase strategic value and innovation? And as a leader, would you like to be respected for your strength of character, resilience, strategic awareness, empowerment of others, strong sense of purpose and your contribution? Would you like to inspire others to grow and fulfill their dreams to make a difference and experience improved well-being, connection and longevity? And I suppose the reason it resonated with me is of a lot of the interviews that I've done and a lot of the books that I've read, it's quite interesting that you are tying together the relationship between HR and managers and leaders. Is that crucial in any organisation?
The reason why I'm targeting HR professionals is essentially within an organisation, somebody has to be accountable for relationships and also networking strategy. And emotional intelligence is obviously part of that. And I saw HR professionals as probably being, the one function within the organisation who should obviously be most accountable and responsible for coaching and facilitating the development of emotional intelligence within, I guess, managers and also leadership, if they have to actually manage up and develop up. But also because it's obviously can be quite a challenging area to provide an independent voice to employees to actually help them to understand and be aware of what's involved in terms of actually developing emotional intelligence. So essentially, I decided to actually write the book and to target HR because, as I said, they should be accountable, but they can also be seen to be independent coaches and facilitators to managers to actually help them develop more emotional awareness, so those managers can actually coach and facilitate their employees. And as well as that, as suggested, can represent those skill sets into leadership.
So the book is written based around your balanced behavioural development model. What's the origin of the model?
When the business startup we worked on some 15 years ago didn't proceed, what I did is I actually sat down and wrote a manuscript on how HR could best operate in organisations. And essentially I came to the conclusion that, as I alluded to before, HR should be responsible for one-to-one relationships, which supports the development of critical reasoning skills, strategic networking, creativity and innovation in organizations, change initiatives, the coaching of emotional intelligence, the aligning of roles and responsibilities to capability, planning implementation, and also personal development. And I saw those roles as obviously being essential to the execution and networking and connecting of strategy within organizations. And what I did find back there was probably not a big focus on vision and strategy. Everything became quite transactional. Obviously, there was the software or the technology market collapse, and I think people really sort of tightened up, and HR outsourcing was probably a big part of that. A lot of the HR people obviously lost their jobs, but those that were left were reassigned to typically business partnering roles and, essentially managing employee problems and compliance. So I did see a gap in organizations, especially around relationships and strategy implementation.
So you're able to give a bit of a high-level introduction to your model.
So essentially, I organise the functions of the organisation around what are emotional associations, but also learning associations. And for example, operations and administration would typically have many-to-many associations. Customer service and sales, who typically deal with obviously the customer and their problems, have many-to-one associations. HR, being all about relationships, have one-to-one associations, whereas marketing communications are more aligned to one-to-many or solutions, and also strategic associations. So, and that's how I essentially map the functions in the organization, pretty much around a cycle, which was along the x-axis past, present, future. Obviously, marketing and communications were more future focused and strategy focused, whereas essentially customer service, sales, and also operations and administration were more reflective and focused more on the doing and past tense, and also reflective type associations. Customer service and sales tended to be more personal focused, as well as HR, whereas operations and administration and also marketing and communications were more outward focused. And that's how those functions were aligned in terms of an organizational structure. I then went on to expand that to include development framework. So, for instance, managers should have great relationship skills. They should be emotionally intelligent. So I map managers to the HR function, for instance, sales and also customer service. In terms of their skills, they're best learnt within a team environment. And when it came to marketing and communications, that they were more sort of leadership skills, and a leader should have a good grasp of obviously the strategy and the pitch into the marketplace, as well as all the I guess functions and understanding and capability of a marketing or a communications person.
Great. Well, I'm interested in this statement you make in chapter 2, and you say there's a new world of HR and management. So what's this new world that you're writing about?
Some of the leading organizations today, they're fast becoming more team focused, agile and organic in their organizational cultures, with managers and HRs assuming the role of facilitators and coaches. This is all about challenging employees to actively participate and to broaden their skills and application. So companies are becoming more about knowledge sharing, open environments, also social purpose, so they can obviously direct more purposely to the community, so they can actually include the customers, knowing that the company is supporting them, and that's defining the organizations of the future. And this is where sort of HR and people strategy can and will succeed over the more sort of competitive hierarchical structures of the past, where strategy was essentially disconnected.
You talk about the value of developing oneself. So how do people go about that? If they make that decision that they want to start to undertake some development, how do you suggest they start?
So within my book, I do explore development techniques. Learning doesn't always need to be structured. Workplaces in this day are encouraging employees to actively participate, to communicate without fear of judgment, and to play to their strengths, which is helping employees to experiment with new behaviours and develop self-confidence. Obviously, a big factor of my book is that represent how behaviours influence our learning, and the more we experiment and the more we're active within an organisational or workplace environment, the more we learn through emotional associations, through learning associations, obviously adopting more of a growth mindset. By aligning these growth objectives and with effective hands-on leadership who can more influence inspiring visions and purposeful strategy, it's a powerful precursor to personal growth, innovation, and strategic success. So on the one hand, providing an environment where employees can partake and experiment, but also with effective leadership who can provide visions and strategies for those employees to have a pathway to growth.
You talk about the need to believe in yourself to enable your growth and the growth of others. So talk to me a little bit about that.
So for most people, as you and I would know, developing self-confidence can be one of our biggest hurdles. And a number of workplace environments today are employing strength-based teams so that people can play to their strengths and build a strong self-belief. Once we're more confident, we can then dig deep to understand our motivations, our likes and dislikes, and also to define our passion and drivers. The more we understand our drivers and how they influence us, the more we can appreciate how other people operate as well. And this level of understanding is pretty essential for managers in terms of managing their employees.
And in the work that you do, are you finding that managers and leaders have that sense?
Through my own experience and having worked in a number of corporations, there's probably a lack of leadership skills, especially around leaders and managers who are emotionally aware and who can act as coaches and facilitators to employees. And that's where I see quite a big gap in the market, especially around emotional development programs, to help managers and leaders sort of open up and become obviously a lot more sort of spatially aware, which is all about self-awareness and cultural awareness. And without being spatially aware, good leaders find it, I guess leaders would find it more difficult to actually influence and inspire employees because they tend to be right brain attributes, which are all about emotional intelligence and also cultural awareness. So, in this day, I think we have a lot more sort of transactional leaders rather than transformational leaders, which tend to be a lot more creative and future focused. And that's essentially where we're at.
I was interested when you wrote about this idea that our identity is a product of knowing who we are. So how do people go about fully understanding who they are?
So obviously people develop their skills over a lifetime, and our skills and development as a child actually play a very important role in defining who we are. And we tend to develop our identities through that growth phase. And the more you sort of understand what got you here, the more you can understand who you are and actually what your drivers are to take you forward. So, throughout our development, our learned behaviours exist as a polarity of opposites. From fear, we tend to learn trust. From every right, there's a wrong. What we believed as a child may be revealed as a myth in adulthood. So what we learn as a child in establishing our capability provides security as an adult when we actually apply ourselves to our work. So identity obviously grows over a lifetime, and the more you sort of understand yourself and where you've come from, the more you can actually apply yourself in moving forward.
And just continuing on this idea of growth, you talk about the idea that people need a level of respect, acceptance, and direction to grow. Is that really about the type of environment that the leader creates for them?
Yeah, absolutely. Positive, inclusive work environments provide the freedom for employees to experiment, to apply their unique understanding, where an environment about respecting their contributions will encourage employees to actively partake. Having respectful leaders and coaching who influence and inspire employees to contribute is another factor mentioned previously, while providing an open, fluid, organic culture encourages the diversifying of skills to also meet those strategic objectives.
I was fascinated when I started to read about the link you make between behaviours and philosophy. I thought it'd be interesting to explore that a little for the listeners.
Yeah. So, the ancient Chinese first represented matter as having opposing states, with a balance of both being desirable. And this is obviously referred to yin and yang, but also the concept of dualism is also represented in many religions. It was the Buddhists who observed life evolving through different states, which became the basis of their behavioural learning objectives through to enlightenment. If you've ever completed a behavioural profile assessment, you'll appreciate that behaviours are also represented in opposing states. Myers-Briggs as an example.
Yeah, we do. Well, I suppose we like to call ourselves at Engine probably agnostic in terms when it comes to all the different profiling and behavioural assessments out there, because what we find is that it can be quite polarising for our clients. So I always tend to personally lean on the idea that whichever one you're undertaking, it's about drawing some level of insight from it, knowing full well that there are plenty of other models out there. So I think you're right where it's about trying to draw what you can from them.
A big part of my book is that all of these behavioural assessments, are all about obviously drawing a line in the sand and actually knowing where you're at in terms of behavioural preferences and your profile. But my book represents how you can actually develop through all profiles, and every behaviour has a purpose, and every quadrant has a purpose for actual development.
One of the things that we often do in our work is we talk about the value of building strong relationships being a key to leadership success. You talk about this idea of forging deeper relationships. Can you share with the listeners why that's such an important part of what you're doing?
Yeah. And I obviously represent a lot of that in my book because I am targeting HR, which, as I said, should be accountable for relationships. So, adopting a positive can-do attitude and a trusting outlook allows us to dig deeper into conversations and to also explore meaningful solutions through critical reasoning. Very much critical reasoning is a product of being emotionally intelligent, so you can actually reason through various scenarios and obviously delve into solutions. Also, being emotionally intelligent is being also present and in the moment, and also provides better listening skills and more spontaneous and authentic responses. This also encourages and draws on our unique perspectives, which is obviously very valuable when applied to outcomes we find meaningful, especially for the individual.
And you talk about why it's so significant that people have a certain level of self-awareness. Why is it such a significant part of this whole idea that you're sharing in your book?
Yeah. Self-awareness is the basis for emotional intelligence and personal development, and accelerated learning techniques will promote an understanding of who we are. The more we know our unique characteristics and learnings, the more we can actually apply them purposely. To know yourself is to more easily learn, unlearn, and relearn. knowing your motivations and drivers also helps to define our purpose, so we can better apply ourselves to future objectives. By understanding our development objectives and being more self-aware, we're more likely to employ a growth mindset.
And following on from our conversation just before around all the different personality types, you actually spend a bit of time talking about the misconceptions of personality types, and you're challenging some of the views. Are you able to go a bit deeper there for us?
Exactly. So Carl Jung was the father of behavioural science. He believed that all functions are undeveloped at birth. As we grow through different functions develop. So in my book, I explore how the opposing Myers-Briggs behavioural traits are in fact growth pathways. And this is also true of the 4 DISC quadrants. So today, behavioural assessments only offer only limited guidance on how behaviours can be learned to influence personal growth. And also in the past, some behaviours were favoured over others. For example, extraversion over introversion. However, I believe all behaviours have a purpose. So in fact, introversion or our inside perspective, along with increasing our empathy or feelings and knowing our motivations, which play out within our instincts or intuition, will help us to build self-awareness. So developing those behavioural skills, intuition, feelings, also being more introspective, will help us to actually develop emotional intelligence. And in this day, as I've suggested before, we have a predominance of transactional left brain leadership styles over our transformative right brain creative leadership styles. So, and again, they're associated with behaviours that are more left brain, thinking, judgment, also sensory behaviours.
And you suggest in the book that all behaviours can be learnt. So my question is, if a leader identifies a particular behaviour that they want to develop, how do you suggest they go out and start learning that particular behaviour?
Okay. So behaviours actually influence our thoughts, which in turn influence our emotions, which then again influence our behaviours in a perpetual cycle. So mastering any one of these is how we learn. The behavioural framework in my book aligns objectives to groups of behaviours to make them easier to learn. So, for instance, judgment, also thinking, and being introspective helps our IQ and learning skills and development in childhood, as an example. The more we're aware of behavioural functions, the easier they are to learn and adapt. For example, also feeling and sharing our environment, trusting our intuition, and resolving the noise and distractions in our mind through self-reflection helps to build self-awareness and emotional intelligence. So that's, again, applying a combination of Myers-Briggs behaviours to actually learn emotional intelligence, as an example.
I was interested when you started making a link between how extraversion and introversion are evident in our nervous system. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yep. So our sympathetic nervous system, which triggers our fight, flight, and freeze response, this works antagonistically with our parasympathetic nervous system being responsible for our rest and digest mode. People who tend to be more self-aware and intuitive have better self-control over their nervous response and can be a lot more calm, calculated, and assured. So, just being a little bit more introspective, understanding more of your body attributes through intuition can actually help you regulate and self-control some of your nervous responses.
And you also, following on from that, you talk about this idea that our evolutionary pathway is evident in a human life cycle. So when you say that, how do you mean?
So, like our evolution, human evolution, we all initiate our life cycle as a single cell, and which obviously develops through a series of stages through to full adult development. And in my book, I represent the primary development stages, which I also map through to the behavioural, opposing behavioural polarities. Number one being infant, which is more about our primary development stages, brain expansion. Child is more about body expansion. Adolescence is more about emotional expansion, and our adulthood is more about cultural awareness or work purpose. Obviously, as secondary growth occurs in the subsequent stage, obviously our brain still starts developing in childhood, but at a slower rate as our body growth then becomes our primary focus, etc. So our capability also develops through each of these stages as well, and different intellectual stages. So, for instance, IQ typically, will develop mostly through childhood. Emotional development initiates into adolescence when the hormones are obviously pumping and facilitating quite a big change in our relationship skills. And as I said, there's behaviours that can be mapped to each of these stages to optimise growth.
I'm noticing a real trend in the clients that we speak to and the leaders that we speak to about this idea about being authentic and how important it is from a leadership perspective. And you talk about this idea of being your authentic self. So what are the challenges people face in your experience when they're trying to make sure that they always are being their authentic self?
Yeah. To be authentic or to be yourself is to be nonconformist and just appreciate your unique qualities. For instance, drop your guard and just obviously relax and try and be yourself more. The more you trust your ability, the more your decisions are your own, and your unique views can also be creative. So just trying to be a little bit more nonconformist and unique in your approach. So also our intuitive processes or instincts will guide our authentic self. They are independent, spontaneous decisions that draw on our value system. And as a measure of our emotional intelligence, intuition is used for problem solving. So drawing on our experiences, habits, gut feel, and your own expertise or common sense defines your intuitive decisions. Intuition adds feelings and personal experience to rational thought to solve complex problems in a multi-dimensional way. So the more you can actually trust your intuition and just be yourself, try and not to overthink situations and be in the moment and be present, the more you will be authentic.
And I was interested as well in exploring this idea with you around how perception completes our intellectual development. Because I often wonder if leaders get enough time to reflect and develop that side of them. So how does perception complete our intellectual development?
So perception is very much a creative skill. So it really evolves as an adult. When we're fully developed and engaged purposely, our perception acts as a powerful radar to alert us to any inconsistency, inequality, or opportunity within our environment. Obviously, employing visions, goals, and objectives aligned to our capability will fuel our environmental or cultural awareness, and also indicates our behavioural mastery. Adapting all our behavioural characteristics helps us to employ all of our executive functions. Executive functions include emotional awareness, critical reasoning, working memory, self-monitoring, planning and prioritising, task initiation, and also organisation. When our perception is switched on to future goals, it's extremely powerful. Our perception will subconsciously collect information to ensure our success, so we can actually accomplish those goals.
So I know that I've got, there's some HR listeners out there in our audience base, and you talk about this new strategic role for HR. So what is that new strategic role?
As I touched on before, to be, HR and managers need to embody trust by being impartial, inclusive, and also being an independent voice to act on behalf of both employees and the organisation without question. And this is pretty much an absolute requirement for an organisation to grow emotional intelligence. As I represented before, emotional intelligence can be quite challenging for some individuals, and they really need to trust their facilitator or coach to actually talk through some of those deeper emotional challenges, and they need support from coaches with strong ethical values who they can trust. Emotional awareness encourages growth mindsets, especially when employees are challenged and allowed the freedom to experiment and grow without fear of reprisal. So, it is quite essential and quite important within organisations that we actually encourage environments to develop emotional intelligence, because it's very powerful. It obviously backs up creativity and innovation, very personal perspectives, and gives people the courage and the resilience to be better contributors within the workplace.
I found it interesting when you wrote that we need to build our self-confidence and our self-reflection before self-awareness. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Okay, sure. Before delving into understanding our belief systems, also our coping mechanisms and inhibitions, we must first be self-confident. And to do that, we play to our strengths, and that'll get us there. When we're confident, we can begin to reflect on our likes and dislikes, to understand our strengths and weaknesses, and to build self-awareness. Challenging our dislikes helps to build a growth mindset. So freeing the mind of distractions and noise also allows us to live in the moment and to explore our creative, authentic attributes. So definitely we need a solid foundation of skills and knowledge. Playing to our strengths builds that self-confidence, so we can actually begin to self-reflect, to understand what those noises and distractions are within our mind, so we can be more present, live in the moment, and develop growth mindsets.
And you encourage the people that read your book to start to prepare for emotional transformation. How do you suggest they prepare for that?
Okay. And, for those people, emotional development, as I said, can be a challenge for some people. Obviously, if you're caring, kind, and sharing in terms of your behaviours, you're probably already there in terms of emotional intelligence. For some people, it is a bit of a challenge. The objective of emotional and growth and self-awareness is to free our mind of complexity and to appreciate a more positive outlook, and with the associated health benefits that comes with that. This may not be for everyone, but should be a requirement for manager and leadership roles who don't obviously display emotional awareness. And I actually set out within my book about 18 different tasks to actually help us to become more positive and emotionally intelligent, some of which I represent. Be mindful of your body's needs, eat healthy and exercise, Take a behavioural assessment to understand your start point in terms of self-awareness. If necessary, use mindfulness and meditation techniques to help you to self-reflect, to deal with those noise and complexity and distractions within your mind. Be grateful and adopt a more positive outlook. Also be more empathetic, be open, and share your environment. And, just essentially engaging more in life and appreciating the beauty around you will actually help to grow your awareness.
You talk about this idea of goal setting, and I think that's one of the things which leaders need to be very, very skilled at so that they can obviously, set out to achieve what it is they need to achieve. And you talk about this idea of the power of the pen. You share a little bit about that.
First and foremost, physically writing down your goals actually imprints your objectives on your unconscious mind, and also engages your reticular activating system, which will guide you and keep you more focused on your task. Ensure your goals align to your passion and purpose to fully engage your capability, which also includes your subconscious mind. As a leader, your goals should be more meaningful to your team, organization, and community to get employee and customer buy-in. Always structure, organize, and prioritize your goals to fully engage your executive functions. So, very powerful. And, your perception when switched on the future, it basically employs your strategic mind and draws in, millions of bits of data to obviously help you fulfill your objectives.
And towards the end of the book, you talk about this idea about why change initiatives often fail. And you write that an individual must appreciate the need for change. So how do we get them to appreciate the need for change?
Yeah. So top-down change is really successful, as leaders might actually think they are the change. Employees tend to resist forced change, especially if they are not respected to input to change solutions. Open communication, providing a compelling reason for change will help to stem resistance, and including employees in change decisions allows them to contribute for better outcomes, and also allows them to appreciate growth pathways and take responsibility for their future.
I did like almost at the very end, these 7 steps to optimize business growth and cultural change. Are you able to just share at a high level what those 7 steps are?
Yeah, sure. As I've already covered in previously, for those in need, definitely offer emotional intelligence programs, especially for managers and leaders, to encourage growth mindsets, but also to increase their spatial awareness, which is important for implementing strategies. So that's number 1. 2, I've touched on create a compelling story or strategy that is effectively communicated to employees. Number 3, use intelligent dashboards sensitive to behavioural needs to visualize and track important milestones. Number 4, always involve employees and celebrate successes as a team. Number 5, ensure systems and processes are aligned to encourage employee growth. Artificial intelligence, for example, should not detract from the ability of employees to actually learn skills and grow. Number 6, find ways to open workplace environments, simplify business complexity, and ways to challenge and engage employees. And finally, employee growth is an essential part of an organization's success. An open source change approach, actually you'll find that online through the CEB company, ensures everybody in the organization is included within the strategic initiatives and development.
And are there any books or people that inspire you?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually somebody who I really admire is Carol Dweck and her book Mindset. And she explores how to encourage growth mindsets. Obviously those who believe in their abilities can be better developed more effectively. The other book I've really come to appreciate, which I actually reference in my book, is an everyone culture, becoming a deliberately developmental organisation, and that's by Robert Keegan and Lisa Lascaux-Leahy, and they basically cover that the key to success is developing everyone within an organisation. Actually, just one other person I did want to mention who's actually provided a testimonial to my book. That's Dr. John DiMartini, who's very much a behavioural master and mentor and author of many books, including The Values Factor, as an example, which I also reference in my book.
And if people want to find out more about you and the work that you do, where should they go?
I have two websites. My author website is www.tonyholmwood.com, and my consulting website being www.outperf4m.com, and that's spelt OUTPERF4m.com.
Any last words on behaviours and leadership?
Essentially, the core of my understanding and my findings within the book is, our environment will influence our success or failure. Promoting open, inclusive environments where every employee is respected to contribute and experiment with different behaviours will enable a proactive culture and also supercharge your business growth.
Well, on that note, Tony Holmwood, thank you so much for being on the Synergen Leadership Podcast. Appreciate it and all the best. That wraps up episode 85 of the Synergen Leadership Podcast. Another great author interview episode for you. I'd like to encourage you, head on over to the Synergen Group website, engage in the conversation with us. Tell us what you liked about the episode, tell us who you'd like me to interview, or tell us what sort of content you'd like us to put together. And if you are an iPhone user, please feel free, head on over to the Apple site and leave us a review. It really does help us build awareness of the podcast. In next week's episode, we have another great curriculum ecosystem episode for you, where I introduce the idea of leadership enablement and why it has become the critical factor in determining leadership success. It's another great content episode. Until then, love to hear what you think. Happy listening.